Lumos.
Let's pull out our wands and light the tips, but we're not blowing smoke. We're here to illuminate. Okay, we're not gonna do this a lot, so let's just rip the band-aid off a little bit and talk about Quidditch. Yeah, in this chapter full of a lot of deep topics and pretty complex issues, we're going with sports. And I'm gonna start by saying that much like another podcaster you may have heard of in this fandom, Mike from Potterless, who doesn't know I exist, I was very much excited by the concept of sports in the wizarding world. I grew up an athlete. I was small, but I was quick and I could jump high, and I was more coordinated than most, and I've never been bad at any sport that I've put forth any effort to actually learn, and I was good at any I actually practiced at. Was I the best? No. Was I a Division I college prospect? Also no. Was I going pro? Hell no. But I could play. And if I made a few decisions differently at that age and put the work in, I'm pretty sure I could have probably played basketball at like a small D3, maybe D2 NAIA school, something like that. Nothing major, but I probably could have held my own. Here's an example of the types of things that I heard along the way in one of those decisions that I'm talking about. So I moved the summer between my freshman and sophomore year in high school. It's one of the hardest choices I actually ever made in my life, and one that I also could never take back. That summer I actually met my future wife, and now we have a beautiful daughter and a life that I wouldn't trade for anything. But in the context of this story, when I was a junior, I actually went back to visit my old high school, and I watched my old classmates play a basketball game. And after the game, I caught up with my old coach for a minute, who had actually coached our group, our grade, at multiple stages. He was our coach in 7th grade and then again in 9th grade. And at this point, he was the varsity coach. So we had a rapport. We had, I had played for him a couple of times already, and he was very familiar with our group, is what I'm saying. So I caught up with him for a minute after the game, and he told me, and it's a direct quote that literally will never come out of my head. It's like seared in there. And he said to me, looking me dead in the eye, "If we still had you, we'd win state." And I didn't have the heart to tell him. At this point, I wasn't even playing basketball for my new school anymore. That's another one of those decisions. None of this is meant to be some kind of weird brag, or because I think you give any level of a shit about my, formidable years. It's not boastful in any kind of way. I just tell you this small part of my personal journey to just help give a little bit of context to my state of mind about Quidditch. The importance of sports in my life remains high to this day. The reason I have this podcast is because I once worked in sports radio. Sports has kind of been my thing, like always. And I listen to at least like 10 different basketball podcasts every week, including the handful of podcasts of people that I've met through podcasting and want to support on a week-to-week basis. I listen to a lot of podcasts, I guess is what I'm saying. I'm also saying I wanted to love Quidditch. I just can't. I don't hate it. It's just, I don't know. It's just meh. So let's do the basics quick that I'm sure we all know by now, but just in case. 3 hoops, each end of the pitch. That's a field for dumb Americans like me. 4 balls, one's a quaffle. It's the only one that's not sentient in any way. They just throw it around and try to get it in the hoops. Kind of like flying rugby with a touch of basketball. Then there are 2 bludgers, which are alive and try to kill you, and a snitch, also alive, tiny, quick, and tries to avoid being captured. The point system are 10 points for throwing the quaffle through a hoop, and 150 for catching the snitch, and that means the game ends. The players playing the game are chasers who throw the quaffle around, a keeper who guards the hoops like a goalie, beaters who hit the bludgers with bats, and a seeker who tries to catch the snitch. The game is played on flying brooms, and there's only one ref responsible for watching all balls and players at one time, so basically, outside of a blatant, clearly visible cheating or whatever right in front of the ref, or murder, pretty much anything goes. It's chaos, and while there's something kind of fun and quirky about the chaos, and it gives a nice break in the reading, for sure, it's just not that fun of a construct for a sport. Too much credit and reliance on one ball and one position for my taste, and it's not a surprise or lost on me that the position is the one that our main character plays. Of course it is, so he's always gets to be the hero. Yes, a game or match can be won by a team who doesn't catch the snitch, but it takes a pretty rare set of circumstances for that to happen, and it just doesn't do anything for me, despite the fact that we actually see it in a later book. I think you could... I don't know. For me, if I was to try to adjust the game of Quidditch to make it a little bit more palatable as a sport, I think you could keep almost everything the same. Add a couple more refs so that kids weren't nearly killed. Put actual boundaries in place, I think, so that the main action of, snitch catching could happen in the view of the stands, but it's very clear that Hogwarts is not good with spectator events. What we don't really need is Harry literally just flying up into the clouds out of view chasing the stupid snitch. And I think if we added a clock and make the snitch worth less, we have a better game. That way you could try to just score as many points as you possibly could within the time limit that you have. The snitch could be caught multiple times, and you can add a bonus to, the catching them. Maybe it's 50 points every time you catch the snitch or something like that. That way, and hell, that could escalate. 50 the first time you catch it. If you catch it twice, you get 60. If you catch it 3 times, you get... I don't know. But it just feels like a more entertaining way to play the game without completely scrapping the whole thing and making it, the only thing that actually matters is if that one person catches the snitch, and we don't really see that well because the snitch can fly pretty much anywhere. Tying it back to our chapter, I've heard some people mention the brooms as being problematic for one thing that they don't like about Quidditch, and how some brooms are faster than others, and that's not fair. Malfoy, Nimbus 2001s. I personally don't care about this part as much. For starters, Harry had the fastest broom until Malfoy's dad, the Booster, donated the latest and greatest to the Slytherin team to get his kid on it. But also, this is more common than I think people really think about or give credit in Muggle sports. They're just done, it's just different. It's done in different ways. Baseball has better, more expensive bats than others that will allow you to hit the ball farther. Golf has better clubs and better balls than others for more distance or more spin and control. Football has all kinds of equipment that can have advantages in their weight and honestly the safety of the player for that matter. Swimming has suits that are better at gliding through the water than others. Some bowling balls hook more, some go straighter. Motorsports are literally won and lost based on the performance and reliability of the engine in the different brands of bike or car that are participating in the racing. The only sports that come to mind for me where I think equipment has less of an impact is English language are basketball and soccer. For those across the pond, football. For both, it's basically just your shoes that are your quote-unquote equipment differentiator. And while there are definitely fancy brands and whatnot, so like there's a tiny bit to that, as a hoops guy myself and a bit of a sneakerhead, I can tell you that none of the shoes I've ever worn, no matter what absurd amount of money they charged me for them, they never helped my shooting stroke. My free throw percentage never got better because of the shoes I was wearing. You know, you gotta have shoes. So, like, you don't want them to have holes in them. You don't want to play in running shoes. You don't want to, like, play barefoot or have super slick, worn out bottoms of the soles because you just go slip and sliding around the floor. But what I'm saying is it's not... If you've got a decent pair of basketball shoes, it doesn't really matter if you have Reebok, Nike, or Adidas, or Puma, or Under Armour on your feet, as long as they're functionally designed for the sport that you're playing. Same with, like, soccer cleats. Like, as long as they're functionally designed for the sport that you're playing, they're not going to make you a better player at that sport in those two cases. But anyways, we're going down a severe rabbit hole, and I've probably lost half of you by now in this thing. Bottom line is there's definitely an advantage in the different speeds of the brooms. And would it be more fair to put all these kids on the same broom? Yeah, of course. I'm just not outraged by it. I mean, I raced motocross for a hot second as a teenager. And, like, I was in a class where not even all of us rode the same sized engine bike. Like, if you want to talk about advantages and disadvantages, let alone the different brands and advantages that came from the different motorcycle manufacturers that you were on, or how new your bike was, or what, like, how well it was running, all of that, like, rampant advantages based on the equipment that you could afford. So I'm just, I can get over the broom thing. I'd rather change some of the rules to make it a more viable spectator sport and the scoring system make a little bit of sense. Now, the author has said that they don't like Quidditch or don't like sports, and so when they wrote Quidditch, they wrote it to be a ridiculous sport, which makes sense as to why people like me find it ridiculous. Anyways, let's get out of the game of Quidditch, and let's talk about the impact that Quidditch has on the series. And I've joked about this before, but here's some things we know. Harry's never been beaten to a snitch that he's been conscious for. Therefore, Harry never loses at Quidditch when he's conscious. I'm emphasizing that because that'll be important later in the series. The games of Quidditch never actually matter, but there's always a plot impact connected to them. Let's think back to what's already happened. The first match in Sorcerer's Stone, Harry's nearly killed but survives the full 8 seconds while Quirrell tried to turn his broom into a bucking bull. Talk about equipment advantages. I can't imagine doing a bull riding contest without the right pair of gloves or chaps or boots or... Never mind. He still caught the snitch in that first match, by the way. The next match we get, Snape's the ref, which increases the trio's suspicion that he's the bad guy in the book. True red herring. And he's just trying to get closer to Harry to actually kill him this time. Harry caught the snitch in record time, and Dumbledore gave him a brief congratulations and some plot pointers. The first match of this book, A Bludger Bewitched by Dobby, had a bullseye on Harry and did everything it could to knock him out of Hogwarts altogether. It broke his arm, allowing him for that hospital wing visit that we needed to get that major plot dump after Lockhart fucked up the healing spell. After, of course, Harry still caught the snitch. And in this chapter, it's not even a match, but the whole rivalry with Slytherin and Malfoy is amplified. We get the introduction of racism in the Wizarding world, and we, don't forget, slugs. Whole bunch of slugs. My point is that none of those instances, it didn't matter how many times the Quaffle went through a hoop, but there was a major plot impact centered around Quidditch. And it's the same for the classroom. Come to think of it, we don't actually sit in class that doesn't have a plot impact. If you really think about this series, and I never had until literally today, before I started recording this podcast, I was in a Discord server and I was starting to have this conversation. I had to delete the whole thing because I realized I was writing a book and nobody was there for that nonsense. But at no point do we read stuff on the page from a scene perspective and our setting and our surrounding that is not completely impactful to the plot of the series that we're reading. And I think that might be part of what makes this series so well written, because we can be in a scene where it seems like it doesn't matter what's happening, and then something from it will come back and it'll really matter. Not every single thing is going to matter, but there's always going to be something that does. For instance, the classroom scene where we're sitting in Flitwick's class. We think that we're just getting introduced to what charms is in the wizarding world and what class is like. And that this is going to be what all of these books are like. This is a school. These kids are supposed to be learning, but no, we're there for Wingardium Leviosa and the Ron and Hermione beef, and then Ron using that very spell to save Hermione's ass from the troll. Same with the Snape classroom scene in that same book. We're not in there to learn what potions is like. We're there to get the setup of Harry versus Snape and that background, plus some Easter eggs for books to come in the ingredients that he talks about. Literally every time we step into a classroom, it's because of the plot. It's not because we're actually learning how the wizarding world works, and these kids are not actually learning magic. It's the same with Quidditch. We're not watching or reading about Quidditch because it matters who scores the points and who wins the game. We're there because whatever happens, it's going to have a major impact on the plot. And it's probably going to have something to do with Harry either being injured, nearly killed, or some combination thereof. And that's it for now, because, spoiler, there will be more Quidditch and more plot, and this is only book 2. You can call that a prophecy, which is something that we learn about in
Divination.
It's time to highlight 4 moments in the chapter that foreshadow something to come in the future. First, and this is a quote, "And banging on about some banshee he banished. If one word of it is true, I'll eat my kettle." Hagrid reflecting on his visit from Lockhart. Of course, we know this foreshadow pretty much by heart by now, right? Lockhart is a fraud. But that's not the real foreshadow. It's when he says Lockhart was the only person who would take the DADA job, because people are starting to think it's cursed. Of course, it is cursed. By Voldemort, no less. And we learn that confirmation in Book 6. Ring theory, connecting Book 2 to Book 6. Number 2, Hagrid mentioning Jenny being there, looking around, is kind of a 2-part foreshadow. He said he thought she was hoping Harry would show up, which is one foreshadow of the crush that she has on Harry, which we know about, but then the eventual ship, and by the way, they make a few kids, so you can say she got what she was looking for in the end, right? But really, she's there because of the roosters. I'm unsure at this point of whether she was currently possessed and Tom had her hunting roosters when she was there talking to Hagrid, or if she was investigating some of the lost time that she had from when Tom took her rooster hunting. Either way, she's not just waiting around trying to run into Harry. She can do that in the dorm that they share. But, again, nothing happens on these pages that's not important to the plot. Number 3, Harry hearing voices. Foreshadow to the monster being a giant snake, and Harry's heading out to, like, you know, be the only one that can speak Parseltongue in this entire school. And he's apparently the only one that can hear well enough to understand Parseltongue in the pipes when nobody else can even hear the thing going. However hissing's supposed to sound through a microphone. That's a really, really bad impression. Please don't judge me any more than you already are. Number 4. I had another slug attack all over a special award for services to the school. Another quote. That one's Ron filling Harry in on his detention. Of course, whose trophy for special awards for services to the school was he polishing multiple times after he threw up slugs on it? Tom Riddle. Let's give away some
house points.
In true Hogwarts fashion, these points are completely subjective with no oversight and fully at my discretion. This week I don't have a lot to give out. I'm going to give some house points to Ron for having the guts to go at Malfoy and ending up taking slugs for the team in Hermione's honor, despite the fact that she didn't even know why she was being defended in the first place. I'll give him 10 points for that. Now I'm going to give away some points from Draco. He's going to lose 25 for being a racist piece of shit. But it's a good thing his daddy's mean and he's not responsible for any of this. I'm also taking some points away from Hagrid. He's losing 10 for hearing this story and not making sure that it got escalated, and Draco getting reprimanded for open, blatant racism against another student in a school. Can I remind you any more that these kids are at a school? Which, we'll keep talking about this for a second. So that's really all I've got the energy for with this particular points nonsense. I'm going to add these ones to the nerdy spreadsheet that I make whenever the heck I make it, but I promise I will make it before this is over, and we will be able to tally up these points for the season-ending Bingy Awards. Before we go, I got to acknowledge the moments in the episode that were utterly
Riddikulus.
Alright, it's not an episode of The Binge if we don't call out what didn't make any sense, starting with, I just mentioned it, Hagrid hearing about Malfoy calling Hermione a mudblood and not going to Dumbledore is, I'm just going to say it, it's bullshit and it's out of character. Hagrid cares too much about Hermione. Hagrid is too close to Dumbledore for this not to come up and for him to just keep this to himself. And beyond that, the fact that nobody else in this group of children went and tattled to a teacher either? That's exactly what happens in schools. How many times when you were a kid were you either witness to the subject of, or let's be honest, the person running to the teacher when somebody called you a name on the playground, or some kid thought he was cool and was cussing and you knew that they weren't supposed to be doing that? May or may not have been me in some semblance of that story. It happens all the time with children. They tell on each other. Anytime someone is perceived as doing something that they're not supposed to be doing, somebody is going to go tell a teacher that they were doing the thing. The person going and doing the telling ends up being told something along the lines of, you know, hey, you don't tattle on people for everything, but thank you for bringing this to my attention. And the person who was doing the bad thing gets a talking to of some sort, depending on the severity of the bad thing. They get punished. That's how this works. That's how schools work. It's totally ridiculous that Draco, at multiple instances during this book series, is able to blatantly yell racist slurs in groups of children and have zero consequences for his actions outside of any student-on-student crime or slug vomiting that should have that was, intended for him. I don't know. It's ridiculous. I'm off my soapbox. The fact that we even had the dust up in the first place in this chapter, though, I also find ridiculous. Oliver's Wood is trying to have secret Quidditch practice, and the stands are just like full of people watching practice, I guess. I know I mentioned it before. Like, I don't remember ever having a student audience for any practices of any sports that I played in. And I literally played them the entire time growing up. It just doesn't make sense. But in this case, we've got stands full of people. Hermione and Ron are there, which they never come to practice. We literally have like 2 instances that I can recall. We have this one, and then we have the time when Hermione shows up to watch tryouts and does the Confundus. Again, book 6, ring theory, 2-6. Anyways, it's not exactly normal. Harry usually just goes to practice, and he meets up with them after. But, plot. And apparently, watching Quidditch practice is just good old fun. With that, we've reached the end of this episode of The Binge. As always, shout out to Producer Jack, who I work like a dog. Remember to follow and subscribe to the show on whatever podcast player you're using right now. And if it supports a rating and review option, please leave one. You have no idea how much that can actually be helpful. If you're so inclined, check out the additional benefits available on patreon.com/belatedbinge. That is even more helpful. If you want to keep the podcast going and help give the support needed to give it that boost and momentum to make sure that we can keep bringing these episodes to you, please consider taking advantage of some of the Patreon benefits over there. If you're reading along, next episode we're covering Chapter 8. Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets with Christina from the Restricted Section podcast. Go check that out. In the meantime, you can start with the Veritaserum chapter from Goblet of Fire, which is the episode I was on as a guest host. And I can't wait to do it again. That'll probably be announced sometime next year. Otherwise, I'll see you next time on the Belated Binge podcast. And Lockhart said he couldn't hear it? Said Ron. Harry could see him frowning in the moonlight. Do you think he was lying? But I don't get it. Even someone invisible would have had to open the door. I know, said Harry, lying back in his 4-poster and staring at the canopy above him. I don't get it either.